At last, at long last, SADC has decided to do something sensible. Pack its bags and leave the DRC. It only took them months of wasted resources, embarrassing battlefield failures, and the slow realization that they had no business being there in the first place. Who would have thought that sending troops to prop up a government notorious for neglecting its own people wouldn't end well? Shocking. The Southern African bloc has finally stopped pretending to be the region's peacekeeping overlords and realized that they were never neutral in this fight. They weren't preventing conflict. They were picking a side, the side of a government that has consistently treated the people of the Eastern Congo like unwanted stepchildren. That's why people think SADC is a joke, because SADC does not care about the people of SADC. It doesn't. It cares about the leadership of SADC. It cares about keeping that leadership in power, keeping that brotherhood in power. No matter what they do to their civilians, no matter what they do to their people. In Mozambique, they stood with the leader instead of the people. In Zimbabwe, they are standing with the leader instead of the people. People are being massacred. People are being killed. People are being repressed left, right, and center. SADC doesn't see that. No, it doesn't. When the people of DRC were being fought by their own government, SADC didn't see that. No, they didn't. But when M23 was formed and started fighting against the government that was repressing the people, then SADC woke up. Do you see the pattern here? The pattern is so sickening. SADC will let citizens of SADC die or suffer while raising the sovereignty card. But the moment the leaders are being attacked, they all come to defend that leader. Where is the sovereignty card now? Let's not mince words. SADC entered the DRC not as a force for peace, but as a hired muscle for Felix Tshisekedi. The moment they decided to help Kinshasa, they stopped being mediators and became an extension of the Congolese army. The very same Congolese army that has for decades treated the Kivu region as a rebellious province rather than a part of its own country. The very same Congolese leadership that has mastered the art of blaming Rwanda, Uganda, and or some other foreign force whenever its own citizens rise up against its failures. So SADC arrived, guns blazing, thinking they were stepping into a simple counterinsurgency operation, only to discover that they were fighting people who have lived under Kinshasa's neglect for generations. Of course, Tshisekedi sold them the usual script. M23 is a foreign-backed rebel group destabilizing our sovereign territory. Classic. He conveniently left out the part where the Congolese government has historically refused to recognize the rights of the Tutsi communities in Eastern Congo, treating them as outsiders despite their deep roots in the region. He forgot to mention how Kinshasa's policies have systematically excluded these communities from power, land rights, and even citizenship, forcing them into a never-ending struggle for recognition. And SADC, without doing its homework, happily jumped in to restore order in a region where the government itself is the problem. But reality hit hard. It turns out M23 isn't just some ragtag militia that can be wiped out in a weekend operation. Unlike the Congolese army, which is infamous for corruption, desertion, and human rights abuses, M23 actually has a structured, disciplined fighting force, and unlike Kinshasa, which rules from air-conditioned offices in the capital, M23 understands the terrain, has local support, and actually believes in something beyond just looting and staying in power. That made things very uncomfortable for SADC troops, who soon realized they were fighting a war they didn't understand on behalf of a government that had already lost the trust of its own people. As casualties piled up and logistical nightmares set in, SADC must have started wondering why they were even there. Maybe someone finally asked the obvious question: why are we risking our troops for a government that can't even govern? Or perhaps the financial strain became too much. Deploying soldiers isn't cheap, and let's be honest, most other countries can barely fund their own basic services. South Africa, which took the lead in the disastrous adventure, is dealing with its own energy crisis, a crumbling economy, and an election season where voters are fed up with the ANC's incompetence. Zambia and Malawi, two other key contributors, are drowning in debt. Zimbabwe is Zimbabwe. Too broke to even pretend it can afford a foreign intervention. So the money was drying up, the war was going nowhere, and suddenly withdrawing became the smart thing to do. Of course, SADC won't admit it made a mistake. No, they will spin this is a strategic redeployment or some other diplomatic nonsense. They will claim they achieved their objectives, whatever that means, and their presence was essential in stabilizing the situation. Meanwhile, the situation remains as unstable as ever. The Congolese government hasn't changed its ways. M23 hasn't been defeated. The region is still a ticking time bomb. And SADC, they're just sneaking out the back door, hoping no one notices that they left the mess exactly as they found it. But don't expect any lessons to be learned. SADC has a long history of backing the wrong side in conflicts and pretending everything is fine. They stood by as Robert Mugabe turned Zimbabwe into an economic graveyard. They looked the other way while Mozambique burned in an insurgence. They coddled Joseph Kabila for years while the DRC sank deeper into chaos. And now, after months of pretending to be Congo's saviors, they are living without so much as an apology or an explanation. So what now? Will the Congolese government finally negotiate with its own citizens instead of waging endless wars against them? Unlikely. Tshisekedi is too busy campaigning for re-election and finding new scapegoats for his failures. Will M23 stop fighting? Not unless Kinshasa suddenly decides to recognize their rights, which isn't happening anytime soon. And will SADC reflect on its mistakes? Of course not. They will simply move on to the next crisis, wait for another clueless leader to beg for their intervention, and repeat the cycle all over again. If you want the truth about African politics without the usual diplomatic sugarcoating, subscribe to Zimwaves TV. We don't do government-approved narratives. We do facts, sarcasm, and reality checks.